India's only Communalist contains a fairly thorough biography, though of course it can be deepened, and that should happen now because now there are still people alive who knew him, and soon that will no longer be the case.
Go ahead, Nalini.
All right. Okay. Namaste. I would like to extend Navratri greetings to all of you, and I would like to welcome all of you to the talk 5 of Sitaram Goel Centenary Year Exposition series. And today's topic is Sitaram Goel on Hindu and Indian nationalism. As you know, Ram Swarup and Sitaram Goel, both of them have pioneered the intellectual freedom movement in India. And there is no other right person to talk about Sitaram Goel's view than Professor Elst, who pretty much knows the Sitaram Goel's heart. And so with that introduction, Professor Elst, please provide your talk.
Yes, okay. Well, today there's no specific book. It's based on things that he said throughout, you see, passim, as they say, throughout his works, except maybe for this book, Time for Stock Taking, Whither Sangh Parivar. That's a collection of short opinions about the performance of the Sangh Parivar in 1997, edited by Goelji. So generally what is in there, and especially the article that led to it, and that's also included in it, namely Time for Stock Taking by Srirang Godbole. That's very much to Goelji's heart. So it's no use here trying to pit the other authors against Goelji. He very much takes, assumes and takes ownership of the opinions by the people herein. Okay, so yes, Goelji had been a freedom fighter himself, as well as Ram Swarupji. So there's nothing against the idea of India in his case. You see, you could call him a nationalist in the very practical sense that he actually did something for India's freedom, that he opposed, of course, the vivisection of India in the form of partition. And also the name that he chose for his publishing outfit was Voice of India. You see, very often when people say India, I, proverbially reach for my gun, because usually the emphasis there is on avoiding the word Hindu. And so, you see, I myself, for example, wrote a book called Decolonizing the Hindu Mind. And so I see all kinds of RSS seminars and so on, using that title, but changing it to Decolonizing the Indian Mind. And so, like for instance, they organize events called India Ideas Conclave, which is just a way of avoiding the word Hindu. Now, in Goelji's case, that was not the case. You know, for him, very much India as an idea stood for Hindu India. And so generally, his work is not about India, but about Hinduism, because you see, India has already been decolonized. India is free. India is a unit, except for Pakistan. Well, that's a big exception, but nevertheless, you see, India, you know, a continent of that size, you know, compared to Europe, could very well have been fragmented, and it is not. So the India that we now have today, you see, that was very much Goelji's preference. But, you know, for that, we don't have to fight anymore. It makes no sense to be a nationalist of that India, because that India is already there. You see, India is a geographic unit, and most of the anti-Hindu forces are not into breaking India, as the now popular term goes. You know, even the Muslims themselves have found in 1947 that perhaps the partition was not the best solution for them, that Maulana Azad's idea of conquering the whole of India rather than only a part of it was perhaps the better option. Most of the Christians, for example, they toyed with an idea of a little partition in 1947 in the Northeast also. It was there for some time, but mostly they've given that up. And anyway, it's not important to Christianity what form the states take, like Christianity in the time of Saint Augustine at the end of the Roman Empire. You know, so with some, well, it was unpleasant to see the Roman Empire fall apart. But you see, as Saint Augustine showed, you see, for Christians, that's not the important thing. The important thing is the Civitas Dei, the city of God. And so we have to realize our Christian ideals in whatever political configuration that happens to be there. Fighting the enemies of Hinduism does not mean fighting the enemies of India. Usually they are not enemies of India. And all the same thing for the West. You see, the centers in the West, both Christian and woke, nowadays, they are not against the state of India so much. They are only against India insofar as it is still seen as an expression of Hinduism. And so Hinduism is besieged, India is not. And so they focused very much on the situation of Hinduism, not of India. Okay, well, the next few things I'm going to say with the help of a PowerPoint. So here goes. Can you see it?
Not yet.
No?
No, not yet.
Because here it's up. So you can't see it, right?
No, we can't see the PowerPoint.
Oh my God. And now?
No.
No. Okay, let's see. No. Just a second. Here it is. Okay, let's try again. Huh? Share screen. Click.
Yes, it's coming now.
Okay.
Yes, we can see the screen now.
Okay. Right. So let me first say a few things that where he was in contact with the RSS throughout his life. A few passages I know from personal conversation. They're not to be found in any book. So, you know, it's with the caveat, you see, maybe I'm a storyteller, maybe I invented all this. I didn't, but if you insist on mistrusting me, you know, you are entitled to. Anyway, so he says that in his student days, around 1940, he knew, of course, fellow students who did join the RSS. He himself didn't. And he says that the guys who were with the RSS were typically very mediocre people who sought some kind of group identity, having little personality themselves. But he had nothing against it at that time. Then as he became a leftist, of course, the RSS was in the enemy camp. But then later when he reverted to pro-Hindu positions and non-leftist positions, he started defending the RSS, though he never joined it. But, you know, when talking with important politicians like Jayaprakash Narayan, whom he knew personally, then he always took up the defense of the RSS. In 1957, during his anti-communist days, he was in contact with Minu Masani and Raja Gopalachari, who set up the Swatantra Party, which in the 1960s would become the largest opposition party in India. And so the 1957 elections came just too early for the Swatantra Party, but they already fielded a few candidates, but legally forced to use another party's ticket, namely a Chansang ticket. There was already from the beginning an alliance between the Chansang and the Swatantra Party, though the Swatantra Party was more explicitly pro-Western and anti-communist, whereas the Chansang was like flirting with socialism and so on. Like for instance, they spoke about Gandhi and socialism. Gandhi was not a socialist, but you see, socialism was in vogue, and don't expect the Sangh Parivar outfits to go against the tide. Then a typical incident, it's not important in itself, but it's typical for how he saw the RSS line of thinking. In 1959, he attended the some meeting in Delhi where the head of the RSS, namely Madhav Sadashiv Golwalkar, was speaking. And so Ramaswarup was somewhat enthusiastic. And so he had driven him there. He was the driver. And so when Golwalkar spoke, he was very unimpressed. Unlike everyone else there, RSS people who were all very psyched to hear Golwalkar speak. And so he was like, laughing in a negative sense. And so when the RSS people got worked up with him, hey, respect, he said, oh, I am only, Ramaswarup's driver. I'm not really listening. Anyway, so he didn't, he was very skeptical when he heard Golwalkar say, Muhammad was a great prophet. Islam is a great religion, but the Muslims are great. The word he was used was paji, which I understand means something like scoundrel, rascal. And so that's a typical attitude, saying that, oh yeah, Islam is okay. And if there's something wrong with Islam, then it is because of the Muslims who don't follow real Islam. And so if they followed real Islam, they'd be better and their behavior would be better. But that's, here is Golwalkar speaking, because after all, we speak largely of his relation with the Hindu political movement. But you see, this is a very widespread opinion. It's like Shashi Tharoor and other Congress ideologues will tell you the same thing. In 1964, Goelji was considered for the chair of the newly created religious front of the RSS, namely the VHP, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. But so when talking this through with Golwalkar and a few other bigwigs of the RSS, Goelji asked, well, to make sure, can I make statements of my own? And then they said, no, you have to toe the RSS line. And then that was not acceptable to Goelji. So nothing came of that. In 1992, he prepared the white paper on Ayodhya by the BJP. So he lent them some help. In fact, his own editing of the white paper was a big correction job on a very shoddy job that had initially been done by Guru Murthy, or by personnel of his, at any rate, by his office. And so Goelji said, you know, this is very shoddy work, and so he did it properly. Then in 1997, he edited this book, Time for Stocktaking, Whither Sangh Parivar. And so that's a very critical look at the Sangh Parivar. And we'll go into that, of course. Another point of contact during the Vajpayee government, 1998 till, well, to 2004, but at least for Goelji till his death in 2003. He was a regular guest of one of the ministers in the cabinet of Vajpayee, namely Arun Shauri, who, well, the ministry where he resided at that time was called Yojana Bhavan, the house of the plan, because originally under Nehru, India had started working with 5-year plans. And so this ministry of parts of the economy that was still called Yojana, so Yojana means plan. Anyway, so at that time, he was not too negative about that government, though he didn't do anything Hindu whatsoever. Arun Shauri's role in that government, in ideological terms, was this. Shauri was a great opponent of reservations. And in fact, later on in 2006 or so, when back in the opposition, he wrote a great book about backwards, something backwards. Anyway, a critique, a very fundamental critique of the reservation system, the most principled and most thorough critique that exists. And so I think that apart from personal misunderstandings, that book is the main reason why he was not chosen as economics minister in the first government of Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi was wooing the backward castes, which has been very successful, in fact. But so in that, you know, at that stage, when it was only beginning, and the leftists were very much doing their best to keep the masses from flocking to Modi. I see at that time it was critical to disown this phase of the opposition against reservations. He wanted to promote reservations, which he has done, and which many Hindus, of course, criticize because that fragments Hindu society, and indeed it is a continuation of the policy of VP Singh, who quite explicitly wanted to use it as a weapon against Hindu society. Anyway, then two negative experiences that, of course, condition his later judgment of the Sangh Parivar. In 1962, he was publishing a series about Nehru in The Organizer. It started with an article in defense of Comrade Krishna Menon, the defense minister, who goofed up badly. And so Goelji's point was, well, you know, everybody's blaming Krishna Menon, but in fact, he's only doing what Jawaharlal Nehru is doing and forces his ministers to do. And so this attack on Nehru was disliked by organizers because they were afraid that if anything happens to Nehru, then the RSS will get the blame, just like happened with the murder of Mahatma Gandhi. So that that series was cancelled, and at that time he was very shocked. In 1985, he was not shocked anymore when the same thing happened. For 3 years, he had been publishing a series of articles in Organizer. These series have then later been bundled into the famous little books that really made the name of Voice of India. And so one of them, the last one, in fact, was Muslim Separatism, which really is a review of a book by H.V. Seshadri, The Tragic Story of Partition, where, of course, he takes the same facts of partition, but interprets them slightly differently. So anyway, during that series, again, you see some order was given from above that it should be stopped. And so the editor K.R. Malkani had to convey the message to him that, it's too dangerous what you're doing and you're offending the Muslims. And how can the Muslims come to us if you keep on writing like this? Now, Malkani is a person I knew quite well. In fact, I owe him a lot because at the time, at the time of the Ayodhya affair, the headquarters of the BJP were in Ashok Road, and you could just walk in there. And I had quite a few interviews with bigwigs of the BJP, often brokered by Malkani. And so for Goelji too, you see, Malkani was open access, was a very friendly man, was quite a gentleman. Nevertheless, he was also a bit silly, and typically in the RSS sense of always seeing the good side of Islam and so on. And this, you see, he nourished with silly stories, chummy stories about how nice Islam is. Like, for instance, here I quote, I'll first quote Goelji. He says, Malkani is a genius for producing sweet stories about Islam out of his hat. And so one of those, I have the literal quote. Muhammad once said to his wife Hind, strictly speaking, this is a mistake. Hind was the wife of the main enemy of Muhammad, Abu Sufyan, who was the sort of chief of the city of Mecca. And so his wife Hind was the most fervent opponent of Islam. But so finally, when he conquered Mecca, he met her and he converted her to Islam. And so, according to Malkani, he said on that occasion, may Allah bless the country after which you are named. Because Hind is a typical Arabic girl's name, but it also happens to mean something, namely India. This is typical for girls' names in most languages, that they evoke opulence, wealth. And so for the Arabs in their desert, India was like the vision of wealth, of success, of achievement. And so that's why Hind was a popular girl's name. Anyway, he never said this about, may Allah bless the country after which you are named. That's an RSS fable. Anyway, Malkani was shortly after also sacked by the RSS leadership, and this was precisely because he had been too friendly with Goelji. Now, a very important difference between Goelji and the RSS is their view of history. So the RSS typically extols heroism and hero worship. And negatively also, they demonize people. Like you see in the whole discussion recently about Aurangzeb, who had been painted very favorably by Audrey Truschke, much to the scandalization of many Hindus. So many Hindus said that, yeah, Aurangzeb this and Aurangzeb that, and Aurangzeb was a monster and so on. You see, that's not the point at all. You see, that Aurangzeb was a monster or that Maharana Pratap was a hero. You see, yeah, that's true. You know, I mean, that it has, you know, you have a right to say that, but it's not the point. You see that individuals are heroic, okay, fine. But, says Goalji, Hindu heroism went to waste because the power of thought was not used to analyze the situation. The context where he writes this is the following. At the time of Muhammad Ghori, he was defeated by the Chalukyas in Gujarat. He was also defeated first by Prithviraj Chauhan of Delhi. And so, and then it was this Sufi, Muinuddin Chishti. He said, well, you see, if you can't win straight, then you have to use deception. War is a stratagem. And so that's then what happened. And Ghori came out victorious. But so the point is that at that time, if Hindus had used their brains, they could have disposed of the Islamic problem once and for all. They were in a position to defeat Ghori forever. And they didn't. You know why? Because they didn't use their brains. Sometimes Hindus do, like a few generations earlier. You see here, Ghori is 1192. In 1030 or 33, Hindus united. There was a coalition of about 12 kings coming together. One of them was the famous philosopher King Raja Bhoja, in order to defeat Salar Masud Ghaznavi, the nephew of the famous Mahmud Ghaznavi. And so he was conquering parts of India for Islam, including Ayodhya. You see, there were 2 or 3 temple demolitions on the Ram Janmabhoomi, and so that was the first one. And the major temple that was built, of which we now have the foundations, that was built, that was like a rebuilding after the earlier temple had been destroyed by Salar Masud Ghaznavi. Anyway, so Hindus came together to defeat him, and they did. Right, so sometimes it happens. But in general, you see, all that the Rajputs and so on were doing was being heroic and dying. And or setting themselves on fire and everything. You know, whereas if Hindus, who were after all in a big majority, if they had used their brains a bit better, you see, they could have prevented a whole lot of the misery that they have gone through in the end. A typical example of this Hindu problem, and indeed very telling for the RSS mentality. You see, the RSS was founded by Maharashtrian Brahmins, partly Chitpavan Brahmins, like Savarkar was not in the RSS, but you see those circles. Tilak was also one of them, Balagangadhara Tilak. So it was a strong core of Hindu nationalism among Maharashtrian Brahmins. Now, their heroes are, of course, the Peshwas, the Brahmin prime ministers originally of Shivaji. And so they were the main force in India in the 18th century. Now, in 1771, Mahaji Sindhya conquers Delhi from the Afghans, from the Rohillas. who had earlier defeated them in the Battle of Panipat. But so he defeats them. They hold the Mughal emperor prisoner, so he frees the Mughal emperor. And what does he do? You see, he was the strongest man in India at the time. He could have folded the Mughal empire there and then and declared himself emperor. Instead, he prostrated, he went fully flat, horizontal, before the Mughal emperor. So, as Goelji commented, they had a fear of their own greatness. They absolutely wanted to be underlings, whereas they were, strictly speaking, in a position of holding power themselves. Indeed, from 1784 onwards, the Peshwas even officially carried the title Protector of the Emperor. So you see, that explains today's attitude of the Sangh Parivar vis-a-vis Islam. You know, they may be physically strong, but they are mentally submissive. Now a few quotes. You know, there are many quotes, I give one of them, but there are many quotes throughout Goelji's work where he is a bit skeptical and tired of the Sangh Parivar. Like, for instance, he explains about the Ayodhya movement, that it came about because the Sangh Parivar, which had turned cold to Hindu causes, oh, it's 2 times there. So they became cold towards Hindu causes over the years, was startled, a mistake, not started, but startled by the rout of the BJP in the 1984 elections when they were reduced to 2 seats. And so they decided to become Hindu again. And so that for that they used the Ram Janmabhoomi movement to give themselves a strong Hindu profile again. The last couple of days, it so happens, on Twitter, I've been in the middle of a debate where people were upset at my view that the Ram Janmabhoomi movement was started by non-RSS politicians, namely by 2 Congress politicians, Dayal Khanna and Gulzari Lal Nanda, ex-prime minister, and also by the Hindu Mahasabha, namely by Mahant Avaidhyanath, who was the guru of the present chief minister Yogi. So people were upset at that, and they said that I was insulting the people who had given their life in the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. I have done no such thing. On the contrary, after the Kothari brothers, 2 of the militants of the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, were killed, I visited their parents, and I expressed my condolence, and I really feel for them. And so, rather than just say, oh yeah, you know, they were heroic, what great sacrifice they brought and so on, I am rather inclined to think, well, what could have been done to avert this? And indeed, you see, in the 1980s, the Congress government under Rajiv Gandhi was quite willing to give Hindus the temple in Ayodhya in exchange for some goodies for the Muslim leadership. That's Congress horse trading. But, you know, it's practical. And it would have delivered, you know, it would have given Hindus the temple. By, let's say, 1995, you could have had your temple, and without any bloodshed. And the Kothari brothers would still be alive, right? But so the RSS was keen on polarization, you know, with marches, you know, the Rath Yatra and so on. because they had to reinvent themselves as leaders of Hindu society or something. Okay, now quotes that are not in print. The first one, in fact, is absolutely is something that I divulged, nobody else, because it was uttered by Goelji the very first time we met. This was in late 1989 at his office in Delhi. He said, "The RSS is the biggest collection of duffers that ever came together in world history." That's a literal quote, absolutely literal. The last time we met, this was in early 2003. Here there are witnesses, and they're still alive. David Frawley and Saradindu Mukherjee were also part of the conversation. So Goelji said, "Hindu society has no future if this BJP movement doesn't perish." Now, he was not always that negative. Like, for instance, he was sometimes, and maybe it's due to older age, or maybe it's due to Hinduism also. But you see, sometimes he was very accepting. And so he said, okay, Vajpayee, whatever negative I've said about him, just let him do what he thinks, according to his own lights is the best. That attitude was also there. And so what was also there was that effectively he cooperated a lot of the time with the RSS and its family. Now, I'll wind up with this what if piece of history. What if Goelji was still alive today? What would he think of the Modi government? Well, in 1994, his, let's say, his lieutenant at that time, Abhas Kumar Chatterjee, ex-civil servant, said the BJP is the Congress B team, or has become the Congress B team. They have nothing to offer anymore that Congress is also offering, only Congress does it better. Goelji also said, in terms of Hindu caliber, the RSS was already a watered down version of the Hindu Mahasabha. And the Jansang, played the game of parliamentary politics and so on. They were also a watered down version of the RSS in terms of their politics. The later Jansang, in the beginning, you had Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, who was a steeled Hindu. Then under Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and especially Nanaji Deshmukh and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, it was, not much anymore. And the BJP was even weaker, though under Advani, there was this Rath Yatra, this Ram Janmabhoomi movement. Then they showed their Hindu colors again a little bit. Now that was when Goelji was alive. If we extend this, we see a further watering down, a further weakening of Hinduism continuing after Advani. And so today, Mohan Bhagwat says things that would have been horrible to Golwalkar. The BJP under Modi is doing, and especially not doing things, that would have been scandalous to the BJP when it was in opposition. Like all this appeasement that the BJP government is doing would have been firmly opposed by the BJP when it was in opposition. And that is why in this book, Time for Stocktaking, one of the main contributors, Goelji's confidant, Shrikant Talageri, says, well, a secularist BJP is more harmful than a secularist Congress. And you can see that now on talking platforms like Twitter, very many BJP activists, rank and file, they start defending everything the BJP does, even if it is exactly what they would have opposed if the Congress did it. And so they start finding good reasons for BJP passivity, for not doing the things that are needed for Hindu society, like abolishing the constitutional discriminations against Hindus. They are now defending the ownership of Hindu temples by the government, because the government happens to be BJP and not Congress, and so on. So a secularist BJP is even more harmful than a secularist Congress. And so what is happening now verifies the prediction made by Vinayak Damodar Savarkar that Congress would evolve to take the positions that then, in Savarkar's time, let's say in 1947, were typical of the Muslim League. And we are more or less there, you see. And similarly, the Jansang, or what is now the BJP, will take the positions that at that time were typical of Congress, like the Gandhian Modi. Modi is very much a Gandhian. So I don't think that Goelji would have been very enthusiastic about this, because you see, he wrote, he developed ideas, he made ideas known. These ideas are important, they're crucial, they're indispensable for action. But then if no action follows, then they're powerless. Now, today you finally have a situation where Hindus really are in a position to do something, and they don't. You see, this, of course, is most visible at the government level. The government is not abolishing these articles in the Constitution. Not at all. It's not changing the appeasement approach that Congress used to have. On the contrary, they pride themselves on appeasing even more. So you see, the time to act is now. The kind of majority that the BJP now has is never going to come back. And so the time to do it is now. And if it doesn't happen now, it's just not going to happen. The only thing that may happen, and here I am very much quoting Goelji as I knew him, is that, well, you see, things may happen that Hindus have never deserved, but that nevertheless end up acting in their favor. And so I see, personally, I see especially, you know, all the work about Islam that he has done, that others have done, is now starting to bear fruit, in the sense that more and more Muslims, though not yet in India, are doubting Islam and are leaving Islam, either openly, usually if they're living in the West or so, where they can a little bit afford it, or secretly if they're living in a Muslim world. But so Islam is weakening from the inside. It's growing, it's advancing, its demography, of course, is very healthy, very robust, but also institutionally it is gaining power, like in Europe, it's very visible. And yet it is weakening from the inside. So you see, Hindu society may well survive, but it's not to any merit of the Hindus themselves. Right now they are wasting their chance like anything, you know, just hugely. So I think I'm being fair to Goelji when I say, you see, this is what he would have said. You know, he would have seen this unique opportunity go to waste because of a lack of brain power applied. Okay, thank you. I will very gladly answer questions or face objections over this.
Thank you, SG. It was a very nice presentation. So I think we can take some questions right now, but I have one request. Let's keep questions to the topic of today.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any questions from anybody?
Everybody in agreement?
I guess so. I think there is nothing. It's obvious, right? That
I had a question. Hi, this is Carl. I'm from Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
With people like Yogi Adityanath sort of making their way to the top and kind of being in the limelight, he would the non-RSS BJP member, traditionalist kind of Hindu background. With that being the future, do you think the Modi iteration of the BJP is a necessary iteration leading to something that might more more to the liking of people like Savarkar and others?
No, I mean, they would have liked the BJP's victory in 2014, but then it all had to begin. Now, I myself at the time was very happy that the BJP won. And in 2019, again, I was in the United States at the time. And so this was at night, we were watching TV, and now, as different from in the past, these election programs are very short because the election results now get electronically, calculated, and so on. It goes very fast. So in a matter of an hour or so, we knew the situation in India. And so it was one good news after another. Like, for instance, the communists were completely routed, not just in West Bengal, also in Kerala. This Kanhaya, what's his name, this communist student, or the student who stood now on, on a communist ticket, he was defeated. Something that made me very, very happy was the victory of Sadhvi Pragya, is her name, in Madhya Pradesh, Bhopal, against Digvijay, who had had her tortured, who had her imprisoned for years, and so on. So that very same man was then defeated by her. That was absolutely justice, and that was very heartening. And that this whole scam of so-called Hindu terrorism and so on was defeated completely. It was very good. And so you see the BJP won and won and won, and far more than we deemed possible. And so they came close to a 2/3 majority, which means that they can alter the constitution, because there are a number of local parties in parliament that are not at all ideologically opposed to the BJP, and that you can make deals with. Maybe not with Congress, maybe not with the communists, but with enough people to cobble together a 2/3 majority. So you see, if the BJP really wants it, it can change the constitution as, you see, Hindu interests require. And so if they don't do that, it's that they don't want to do it. It's not that they cannot do it. No. They've decided, they want appeasement. They want to be secularist and so on. So that's the bad news. There are still RSS people and so on. They say, yeah, look how great we are. We scored victory. We are in power. But you see, it doesn't mean anything. If you're in power, I mean, they are not in power. They are in office. That's something else. This is a distinction I have learned from Arun Shauri, who, taught me that. To be in power means that you're able to change things, that you're able to impose your own vision. Now, that's not at all what the BJP is doing. It's simply enjoying the perks of office. And so the BJP ministers can go home and boast to their family and friends, look, I am powerful. Do you want a job? Okay, I can give it to you. And the usual, you see, all the same things that Congress politicians have also done. Maybe they're a little bit less corrupt on the BJP side, but they're just as uninterested in real change. And so they're not in power, they're only in office. Make that distinction. And so you see, there are many BJP men and so on who are crowing about this. Look, look how good we are, to achieve this. Well, it is like there is a famous Roman proverb that was said to Hannibal. Hannibal had almost conquered Rome, not yet, but he was going to. And then his lieutenant said, "You can win, but you cannot use your victory." And so after having defeated the Romans and being able to take Rome, you see, he didn't. And so similarly, the BJP now is in a position to defeat secularism, and it doesn't. You see, just like Mahatma Sindhya in 1771, it is prostrating before the Mughal. It could fold the Mughal Empire, here it could fold the secularist system. And on the contrary, it is totally submissive to the secularist system.
Adanji?
Oh, hello.
Yes.
This is brilliant. Thank you very much, Dr. Els. Appreciate this is Madan.
Yeah, Madan, I've recognized you. Of course, I'm happy to meet.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that Hinduism has survived through the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we don't give credit to the struggle and the fight that Hindus put up. For example, Rana Pratap and other luminaries. It's not taught in our school system, so we are not aware of the fight and the struggle that they mounted. And also, India was the first country that liberated itself from the clutches of the British Empire.
Yeah.
As we all know that the British rule covered much of the known world. The sun never set on the British Empire, as we know.
Yeah.
And the people who fought for India's independence, by and large, were the Hindu revolutionaries.
Yeah.
The names are many. Shri Aurobindo, Vivekananda's background, Ramakrishna, even Gandhi, Tilak, Gokhale. The list is a long one. And we got very little support from the Muslim minority in getting rid of the British.
Yeah.
After India became independent in 1947, much of the rest of the world followed in throwing off the British colonial rule. So I want to pay tribute to the history of Hindu struggle against the Muslim 700-year-old long hegemony and against the British. However, I think the greatest danger to Hinduism, and I agree here with Dr. Els here, is after we have gained independence. I think Hinduism is declining at a very rapid rate. We are imbibing westernization at a very high speed. I'm settled in the United States, and when I go to Punjab, where I come from, even the lower classes have taken to the Western mode of dressing, for example, even though Indian climate is not suited to wearing jeans and tops and all that, but that's what is prevailing. And also I have learned recently that in Punjab, Christianity is advancing at a very rapid rate, which just doesn't make any sense to me. I thought Sikhs would be very protective of their religion, but that apparently is not the case. So in conclusion, I think Hindus are under more of a threat in independent India, and we are not mounting the struggle that we did either during the Islamic period or under the British. And I want to congratulate Dr. Els for outlining it so brilliantly.
Yeah, The latter phenomenon that you outline is perhaps very easily illustrated by the language issue. You see, until 1947, everybody, all the freedom fighters were in agreement that an independent India would do away with English.
Yeah.
And in the Constituent Assembly, there was a vote between Sanskrit and Hindi as a national link language. There were 0 votes for English. Nobody, absolutely nobody who had known the freedom struggle would want to continue with English. And yet, you see, then the anti-colonial enthusiasm waned, and so English came back. And by 1965, the constitutional provision that it would become Hindi was annulled, was neutralized. So similarly with Christianity, as we discussed yesterday, you see, Christianity was in dire straits on the time of independence. They were afraid because in neighboring China, they were suffering badly under Maoist conquest. So they thought that this could happen in India, and it didn't happen at all. On the contrary, because Nehru and Indira greatly patronized the Christian missions. Independent India is in many respects not such a good thing for Hindus. And so in 2014, I myself wrote very enthusiastically about Modi's victory. Also, you know, Modi was attractive because to Hindus because he was not the candidate of the BJP leadership. You know, in this respect, you know, sorry for the comparison, but in this respect, he was a little bit like Donald Trump, who was not liked by the Republican Party leadership at all, who was like imposed from below. And so the same thing happened with Modi. The party leadership wanted Rajnath Singh as the prime minister candidate. It is from below that, you know, people were so enthusiastic about Modi that, okay, finally they accepted Modi, though they didn't really want someone with the name of, so again, not the reality, but, you know, with the reputation of being a Hindu fanatic. But that's exactly what the Hindu masses wanted. And so they finally accepted him simply because, well, they liked the idea of victory and they saw that he could get the votes out. But so he was too Hindu for them. Now that's what me, just like so many voters, very much liked. And so I said, you know, what is now apt is a repeat of the speech that Nehru gave at the time of independence. You know, a moment comes in life, which comes but very rarely, when we step from the old into the new, when the soul of a people long suppressed finds utterance. You know, I thought this is the moment, you know, this is when, you know, Hindu India is finally coming into its own. But, you know, unfortunately, that was a disappointment. Though it was not as bad as Congress ruled before, you know, things like the Right to Education Act. In fact, only a year before those elections, they had been seriously planning some kind of a, you know, extra constitutional body that would really take control of government and so on. A very anti-Hindu dictatorial measures. So, you know, all that was averted by Modi's victory. So you see, I'm still happy that he won. Nevertheless, his government has not at all delivered what it could have.
May I ask a question, or actually, Dr. Ernst to comment on?
Krishnji, one point, I think.
Okay. I don't think I'm an apologist for Mr. Modi, but I happen to think that Hindus are, well, Christians and Muslims are a privileged community in India.
Yes.
And they have been, many ways, actually richer. And Mr. Modi, I think, is what he's doing or has done so far, is to uplift, probably you can say, the rural India mostly. And by doing so, I think in my thinking, he's bringing some spine or strength in the spine of Hindus, because the poor people are not able to do anything. They remain quiet. They are busy with earning their livelihood on a daily basis. So indirectly, I think, personally, I think indirectly he is strengthening the Hindu backbone, so to say. And he is, I think, elected by the poor people of the villages, not so much of the city as in the villages. So I would like Dr. Els to comment that in that sense, does he have a contribution, may I say, towards strengthening the Hinduism and the Hindu India?
Yeah, well, I must confess, you see, sitting where I am now, which is outside India, I do not have my finger on the pulse of public opinion and of the experiences that the common people at the moment go through. So I imagine that things like his scheme for providing the poor with toilets, that makes a big difference to the daily life of millions of people. I really have no sense for what it is in practice, but I mean, it was a very good move that I can see from the outside. Indira said Garibi Hatao, but she didn't care about what the poor people went through. And so he does, of course, partly because he has the experience of, being backward, so-called himself. So yes, you see, at that level, he's done important things. Nevertheless, it was very easy to change the constitution on Article 25 to 30. It does not concern the minorities at all. Like the all-important Article 30, which discriminates against Hindus in matters of education, so that minorities can have their own schools, Hindus cannot. You can change that overnight. You see, it's going to evoke even less protest than the CAA. You could even pull off the normalization of the Kashmir situation, at least formally, which nobody had expected. That was really a surprise. And Modi could only do it in his, newfound secularism, because Article 370 doesn't speak about Islam or Hinduism. Formally, this was only a national issue, not a Hindu versus Muslim issue. Even though in practice, of course, everybody knows it is. But so real Hindu issues like freeing Hindus from the constraints imposed on them and not on the minorities by Articles 25 to 30, that could have been changed overnight because the minorities are not touched by that. Of course, in the media, they're going to immediately say, yeah, you see, but in fact, we really know that behind all this is some anti-minority animus, blah, 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 blah. That's what they say, but the facts are that these things do not touch the minorities. So you could do it easily. And so if the BJP doesn't do it, I still have a hard time understanding that,
I am not sitting in India. In fact, I left India in 1961. I'm sitting here in the United States. But what I was going to say was, this was the first prime minister who said you don't have to certify the copies of your transcripts. And I thought that was the first stroke against the colonialism in India, they inherited and so on and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that was a brilliant move. And now the problem I think is that BJP government has to get elected. And they had such a push of Hindutva in Bengal, but they did not succeed. And Gundaism or whatever you might call it, and the same thing is happening now in UP, in Lakhimpur Kheri, and what I'm hearing about and seeing on the videos. So because he has this handicap that the BJP government has to be elected, they cannot do what China is doing, get rid of madrasas, get rid of this, get rid of that, and or change these things overnight. So I would like to have your comments on that. That my personal thinking is that they have to move slowly rather, and that's the price we have to pay, rather than in quick succession, they could bring these changes that we are talking about. Of course, we would like those changes very much, but I think Mr. Modi is handicapped. And also what is happening in our neighborhood. He has to deal with what is happening on the borders. He has to deal with what is happening in Afghanistan, which will have effect in Kashmir. And it already is happening because there are pointed and directed killings of Hindus in Kashmir. So all these things are creating a problem. Your comments, please.
Krishanji, may I just interject if you don't mind? I think there are 3 more persons that have been waiting to ask the questions. If you don't mind, I want to give the opportunity for them to ask the question, and then Professor else
Okay, but you see, first one sentence about this. You see, it's not like as if Modi has to do all this by himself. I mean, yes, of course, I know that there are very many things to be done, but he has many people at his disposal, I think. You know, there are 300 plus members of parliament in his party who can do things. I mean, really, there's the administration at their disposal, which theoretically has to obey whatever the politicians tell them. So, you know, it's not like there is no time to do things. He has to go slowly. No, you see, these things are easy. You know, they're easier than, for instance, normalizing Kashmir. There you could expect a lot of opposition, at least in Kashmir itself, because the Muslims in the rest of India don't care for the separateness of Kashmir. On the contrary, for them, Kashmir being a part of India is a guarantee that there is a place for Muslims in India. So you know, this Kashmir issue is, you know, is less touchy. I mean, because everybody treats it as very touchy. You know, it's given a lot of importance. In fact, I won't say it's easy to handle, far from me. Nevertheless, let's not exaggerate. But these issues, Article 30 of the Constitution and so on, they are really quite easy to handle. There's just no excuse for postponing. You see, the normal course in these things would have been that when in opposition, they drew up a plan about what to do. When they come to power, they immediately start doing it. At that time, they don't need any time anymore for preparing and thinking through. That's what you do when you're in the opposition. Then when you're in government, action. So this could have been over 5 years ago. And now you see, it's a big question is if it will ever happen. So you see, it's waiting for things. I don't think there's anything to wait for.
Professor Shivaji.
Okay, other questions?
Professor Shivaji.
Yes, it's very, very nice to learn, to understand the times when the Sitaram Goelji and Ram Sarusvi were really intellectual leaders. My question to you is, sir, were there any other leaders who were aligning towards the thinking of Goelji and Ram Sarusvi? Because the reason I'm asking this question, based on my some understanding, being educated from a small village all the way to PhD from IIT Kanpur, came more than 41 years ago, living in America, and also studying and working in various areas, including the constitutional struggle and the revolution in America. How did they come up with the ideas? In India, I personally think, in one sentence, I may be wrong, that in 1947, I consider myself to be of the opinion that it was a transfer of political power from White Sahib to Brown Sahib. Nothing was rebuilt. As far the Indian conditions are concerned, Indian history is concerned, Hindu heritage is concerned, nothing was really taken into account to rebuild and get the complete independence of India. So my question again is, were there other leaders at the time who were aligning towards thinking of Goelji? Thank you so much. I'm sorry for taking time.
Yeah, no. It's an important question. Were there other leaders? No, you see, in the 50s, there was, of course, Raja Gopalachari, who set up this Swatantra party. That, of course, Goelji wholeheartedly cooperated with. But, he was out of power. So,
Out of power. Mhm.
So whether in power, like Indira at one point, of course, won the hearts of every Hindu when she won the Bangladesh war, about which Goelji's mentor Ram Swarup said, well, at the time of this war, we only had Indira, but then she won. And so you should see that for the Hindu situation, there's a lot wrong with the RSS. We only have the RSS, but then you see, sometimes they do deliver. And so you see that was, the lack of politicians that he wholeheartedly supported, yet the fact that sometimes some things do get done, that for him was a consolation and a reassurance that, well, you see, okay, even the RSS, they're not perfect, but they're a lot better than us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Ravinderji, your question, please.
Yeah, it's a sort of comment and a question, actually. The question is particularly regarding the, we are in a rock and a hard place, actually, in India, that we have only BJP to vote for. We don't have an alternative. And we have only RSS, which is basically the apparently supposed to be Hindu party, but nevertheless, both are intellectually and not in tune with what needs to. There is no vision on these issues. I find Modi ji very capable person from the point of view of the external security and the internal economic issues, but so far as Hindu issues is concerned, I think he's a total failure. Actually, he doesn't have any clue about that. Yeah. So my question to you is actually that what is in this situation, what could be the possible solutions which you see?
Yeah, well, let's first sketch, why I don't see a solution where there should have been one. You see, Hindus, and I'm not telling you a secret, I think, they're very good at wailing. And so they're complaining aloud. You see that this BJP government isn't doing anything pro-Hindu. This is true. However, what I also see is that nobody's doing anything to make the BJP more pro-Hindu. You see, after all, now, of course, many opportunists have joined, have jumped on the BJP bandwagon. But still, you see, most people who are in there originally joined because they wanted to do something for Hinduism. And so that basic motivation is not gone. You see, that's why I'm not entirely giving up on them. You see, some people say, oh, we should create a new party and so on. Yeah, but you see, if the BJP can get corrupted, can weaken, can lose its Hindu moorings, that can also happen to the next party. So, why start a next party? It's better to, get the BJP to rediscover its roots and to become a Hindu party again. So, I mean, I'm not an Indian voter, but, personally, if there were elections now, I would still vote BJP in spite of all my criticism, because with that criticism, you have a slightly better chance of getting somewhere with BJP people than with Congress people. But you see, I never ever hear any of those complainers say, oh yeah, and yesterday, you see this friend of mine who is a BJP office bearer, I told him this and this, but he told me, no, we can't do it, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, you see that kind of report about attempts to make the BJP more or less, get closer again to a pro-Hindu line. I never hear that. Neither successful nor failure. You see, there's no attempt at all. No Hindu is doing anything. And so that is a bit disheartening.
It actually, with my tiny efforts, I have tried to meet the think tanks in RSS, try to communicate to them that these are the issues of larger vision is entirely missing, and you will miss this boat, etc., etc. But sometimes I get very weird responses like, oh, Hindu temples cannot be freed because the Hindu priests are corrupt. This was a response. This was really a response. So I asked him that why you do think the mosques and the what is called others, they're not corrupt. There was suddenly no answer. So I find deep lack of understanding.
Ravinderji, may I interject for a minute? So
I'm done.
Yeah, we are almost at the time, but there is one more question. Would you consider taking one more question? Professor?
Yeah, of course. Come on.
Debji?
Yes, Dr. Elst, I am, thank you for pointing out that I believe what you said is there's a short window for these changes to the constitutions.
Yes.
And I agree, we should act. So my question to you is, can you help us develop a core group to go and influence the BJP through, we have organizations like HAF, which are doing great work, but this could be one of their activities, is because when you're sitting inside India, you're covered with so many issues. We're outside, we have a better, like you can, better say, hey, because I don't think we'll be back in power in 24. There's no guarantee. And then the opportunity for correcting the injustices to the Hindu society will be lost for forever, I think. So this is the time, it's very urgent. We take, just as you said, you don't hear any Hindus doing it. Let's try to at least, Mr. Goel, you sound like you have made efforts. Can we talk after this? And
well, you see, I guess you have my email address. It's simply my name. It's just, I'll put it on chat. But you see, I'm perfectly willing to help you, working behind the scenes. But in any official capacity, of course, I cannot do anything because, for a very primary reason, which is that they don't like foreigners. And so
you can give us advice, or we can find a guy they like, for example, HAF or Kona. I'm just Mr. Goel may have better contacts than I do. But anyway, yes, if we have your email, I'd like to, and Mr. Goel, yours also, and anybody else who wants to sort of form a little group to, because I feel very urgent. This is very important. We take some action because thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is a critical issue.
Yes, actually, I'll gladly cooperate. Yes.
I may just add one thing, that the recent survey, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, for the hardcore stand which Yogi has taken, he has much higher rating for approval than Modi ji has. They want him to be the prime minister in the survey.
On my part also, you see, Modi was fine. You see, I was happy he won, but you see, a politician who really has my approval is Yogi. You see, I was very enthusiastic when he suddenly came to power, and I like his policies, let Modi, let Yogi become the prime minister, of course.
SG, I think we are at the top of the hour. Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Els.